Hey everyone, hope you're having a fantastic day. Let's continue our reading of the Federalist Papers. We're in Alexander's essay number 23 titled The Necessity of a Government as Energetic as the One Proposed to the Preservation of the Union. Talk about titles. Let's continue, okay? This power ought to be coextensive with all the possible combinations of such circumstances, and ought to be under the direction of the same councils which are appointed to preside over the common defense. So the power to be coexistive with different combinations, depending on the circumstances, that's going to be under the control of the councils which are appointed to preside over the common defense. This is one of those truths which, to a correct and unprejudiced mind, carries its own evidence along with it. Look at that. So, unprejudiced mind. So, you need to be open and reasonable, he's contending, right? And may be obscured, but cannot be made plainer by argument or reasoning. When you make things plain, it's showing that you're really making your argument and you're reasoning it sufficiently. It rests upon axioms, as simple as they are universal. The means ought to be proportioned to the end. The means ought to be proportioned to the end. That's a very interesting way to put it, because Machiavelli was like, means to an end. And he's saying, yeah, but proportional. Little caveat there. Not excessive, right? The persons from whose agency the attainment of any end is expected ought to possess the means by which it is to be attained. Or so we hope, right? We have to hope that they possess the means. If you don't have possess the means, then you're going to do way more things that aren't proportional, right? Whether there ought to be a federal government entrusted with the care of the common defense is a question in the first instance, open to discussion. Well, I would say that's a close and cut case. You need to have a federal government to defend the Union. A confederate system just doesn't work because you can put the tribes against each other too much. The Iroquois Confederacy proved that quite well, and then he gave us the Greek city-state examples. Remember, in the other essays, he spent a lot of time highlighting the insufficiency of a confederacy to preserve the Union. He dug into that for quite over 4 essays. But the moment it is decided in the affirmative, it will follow that the government ought to be clothed with all the powers requisite to complete execution of its trust. Look at this. So, it will follow that the government should be given the powers that is needed to execute and maintain trust. Because remember, consent of the people. People need to be able to trust their government and know that their voice will be heard and they will be properly represented. Not censorship rules for some and others not. Right? There is no you can do this and you cannot. You can riot, but you cannot. No, there needs to be trust in the government, and right now there is zero trust. Very zero trust. It doesn't matter how the tech companies spam you with their notifications that they tag on your posts or anything like that. There isn't trust. Anyone who says there is a liar. That or they watch too much CNN. And unless it can be shown that the circumstances which may affect the public safety are reducible within certain determinate limits, unless the contrary of this position can be fairly and rationally disputed. So, unless it can be shown that safety is going to be reduced within the limits, you need to propose the contrary of that in order to really rationally dispute the points of how a federal system is not needed, right? You see that? How he did that? It must be admitted as a necessary consequence that there can be no limitation of that authority which is provided for the defense and protection of the community in any matter essential to its efficacy. That is, in any matter essential to the formation, direction, or support of the national forces. Okay, excellent. So, it's necessary that there should be no limitation of authority for the preservation of the national forces. So you need to have defense and protection of the community, and you need to make sure that the formation, direction, and support of it is in line with the consent of the people, but also to maintain peace and order. So the national forces via a federal union are going to have a better time being more effective and maintaining that order that we'll need for trade and other factors. It's essential to efficacy that the authority not have limits. You see what he's saying? Quite fantastic. Defective as the present confederation has been proved to be, this principle appears to have been fully recognized by the framers of it, though they have not made proper or adequate provision for its exercise. Congress have an unlimited discretion to make requisitions of men and money, to govern the army and navy, to direct their operations. Okay, so look, this is the duty of Congress. Having unlimited discretion of men and money. And then Congress governing the army and the navy. You see that? And to direct the operations of the army, the money, and the navy. Well, the requisitions of the men and money, as the requisitions are made constitutionally binding upon the states, who are in fact under the most solemn obligations to furnish the supplies required of them. So look at that. The Constitution is a binding force for the states. They are under a solemn obligation to the federal union, and they are obligated to furnish supplies required for the maintainment, direction, support, and formation of the national forces. You see that? The intention evidently was that the United States should command whatever resources were by them judged requisite to the common defense and general welfare. Now, yes, I would agree with that. So, the general welfare and the common defense is the duty of the Union. The states must give to the treasury of the federal union for the maintainment of that, right? That is how you're going to keep commerce and concord. It was presumed that a sense of their true interests and a regard to the dictates of good faith would be found sufficient pledges for the punctual performance of the duty of the members to the federal head. I like how he said that. You can just, have an oath. He's like, no, you can't presume the true interests, right? You can't presume it. You cannot just take good faith on it. He's like, nah. You cannot think that that's a sufficient pledge. And even if you are punctual in that performance, you got a duty to the federal head, as he put it. Cough up that money. The experiment has, however, demonstrated that this expectation was ill-founded and illusory, and the observations made under the last head will, I imagine, have sufficed to convince the impartial and discerning that there is an absolute necessity for an entire change in the first principles of the system. So notice this, the impartial, and discerning. You see what he does here? So the partial and discerning, he'll say things about arguing and reasoning, people who think, people who are very wise. You see how he compliments the people he's talking to when he gives a speech? He's saying, my speech will suffice and convince those who are impartial and discerning and reasonable. It's like if you want to get along with him and you want to hear his point, you're like, well, I'm discerning, I'm reasonable. What do you have to say? You see? But if he was insulting you and berating you, calling you a buzzword, labeling you, slamming you, you'd be like, hey, I'm gone. But see, the way he persuades you to keep listening to him is quite brilliant. So the first principles, he's saying there needs to be a change, right? That if we are in earnest about giving the union energy, so we have to be earnest about giving the union energy and duration. Notice that. Earnest in giving energy to the preservation of the national forces and of the union. To preserve the union, you need to be earnest about it. You want it. You want to have energy for it. You want it to last. You want the union to last. You see the people today doing the opposite. They're trying to maximize gender against gender, parent against child, husband against wife, faction, identity politics on top of identity politics, balkanization, right? Fracture, balkanize, pick off, then come in to smash out everyone else because there's no longer a solid unified force. It's like you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? If I slap you with 5 fingers open, it doesn't hurt. But if I take all those and I put in a fist, well, now it's gonna really hurt. So that's like the federal union. That's what it's like. So people should want to put in the energy for their country. You see that? You shouldn't hate your country and want it to be destroyed.